Okay, so welcome to your 3D print workshop tutorials. This one we're covering part D, the Boolean. So I'm going to show you some techniques related to how to model the geometries here and do kind of Boolean operations to create the shapes. So I want to point out before I start, there's these two kind of bounding box options that we can start from, the 2x2x2 cube or the 3x1x3 tile. So with this one, I'm going to use the cube again. And then I also want to point out, the rules are that we have to have two kind of orientations where the geometry can meet. So, like that face and that face, or that face and that face. I'll show you in the video a couple of ways that we can kind of make shapes that do that. So just turn on my. First thing I want to do in Rhino is open up or type in the command units. From the drop down, I'm going to change into inches here, and then click OK. And make sure you're in inches before you start. And then I'll make a box so I'm just using the command box there. Type in 0, 0, press enter, and then 2, enter, 2, enter, 2, enter. So 2x2x2 to model the kind of bounding box shape. And then what I want to do is I'm going to work in 3D here, so I'm going to orbit my view into 3D. So I'll hold Control-Shift on the keyboard, right-click and drag. You can also get to it by clicking on the orbit button in the standard toolbar, and then clicking and dragging. And once you're in 3D, all you got to do is right-click and drag, and you can orbit. I also want to point out that as you're working in 3D, if you find that you get kind of lost here. So like, for example, when you start to orbit, if your geometry disappears, the way to reset that is just to select the geometry, type in zoom or Z, enter, and then hit the option selected, or S, enter. And then that'll reset the object to the center of your orbit. I'm also going to work in ghosted view here, so right-click in the top left to set the display mode of your viewport. And if you want to change how transparent it is so you can kind of see better, what you want to do is type in the command line display properties to open up this display properties panel here on the right. And if you scroll down about halfway, you'll find this little option transparency, and we can turn it up to make it kind of more transparent so we can see what we're doing better if we need to. Okay, and then so I'm going to go ahead and get started and show you a few ways to model with this geometric type. First, I'm going to set my current layer to another one, and I'll make this, I'll rename the box to my bounding box. Okay, and then I'm actually just going to copy this guy real quick before I get started. So I'm just using the command copy, holding shift. Okay, and so I want to show you a couple different ways to model here, but basically all of them are going to involve solid geometries. So the Boolean operation basically requires that we have closed polysurface shapes. And to make the kind of basics, what you can do in Rhino is just go to this little box icon, click on the corner to expand it. And you can see here we have the option to make all kinds of different kind of basic solid geometries. The box, the cylinder, the sphere, the cone, etc. And so what we need is for all the kind of objects to be closed surfaces, closed polysurfaces, in order for our Boolean to work. So I'm going to start with just a sphere object. And then the other thing that I want to point out here is we're going to work in a similar way to what we did in the thickened 2D tutorial, if you watched that one. So I'm going to make a sphere around the center of one edge of my geometry there. So I snap to the midpoint of one edge there. And so the way we're going to make this thing kind of modular is by basically repeating the same geometry around the box. And I'm going to show you just a few different ways to do that, basically transform the geometry. So in this case, what we're going to do is just a straight rotation. And because the object is symmetrical, we could even actually skip that. We could just copy the object from the center point or the midpoint of each edge, or from its original edge to the midpoint of every other edge. And so I'm just looking for that midpoint snap. We copy it to every midpoint. And there we go. So the other thing we want to look out for just in this particular example is that, on one face of the box, we're not seeing the spheres intersect each other. And so like I said before, I'll make a copy of this. In order for a Boolean operation to work, we need all the geometries to be closed solids. So it's basically going to subtract one shape from another. So then I'll type in the command Boolean difference. And I'm going to select the original geometry, which is our box. That's the object we want to subtract from. And then press enter. And then the objects I want to subtract with are all of the spheres. And there we go. So there's our shape. And just so I can point out to you, so we can kind of copy this shape in every direction. And it forms a, oops, and it will tile like so. And because of the way we modeled it, it forms a kind of repeating pattern between the modules. So if you switch into rendered, you can see that more clearly. There's a kind of, the original module starts to kind of disappear. And it can kind of extend, so we can copy it in 3 different directions. So we're hitting the rule here, which is to be able to copy it between 3 different possible faces. So there's the kind of first, probably the most basic example, which is just to move everything around relative to one edge. So let me show you kind of what I'm talking about in terms of the repeating transformations. So with this example, I'm just making another copy of my box, and I'm going to use an ellipsoid rather than a sphere this time, so it's slightly asymmetrical. And I'll just start by clicking or snapping to one of the corners of my box. And then I'll drag this guy out, kind of make a, oops. So right there, zoom selected. Basically, I have a kind of asymmetrical shape. Let's make it a little flatter in one dimension. Okay, and so there's our object, and we've oriented it around one of the corners of the box. So what we need to do now is kind of copy it around the box. Rather than just copying, we're going to actually rotate it and move it around the box. So in order to rotate this around one face of the box, what I want to do first is select the box and type in volume centroid. And what that does is it produces a little point at the center of the box, and that makes it easier for me to rotate this guy. So now I'll select my geometry again, type in the command rotate, snap to the center point, and then I'm holding shift. I have the option copy turned on, and I'm still holding shift, and I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees, 180, and then 270. And when I'm done, I'll press enter. And then if I look at the top of the box, you can see it's kind of rotationally symmetrical around that face. So, it's kind of rotating around one edge. And then in order to move it to the other side of the box, I'll just select it. And this time I'll use the command mirror. So I'll type in mirror. I'm going to hit the option 3-point. You want to make sure copy is turned on again. I'll snap to the midpoint, or I'm sorry, the volume center, that point we made. What's going on? And then I want to just drag out so I make a horizontal plane, basically. I'm just holding shift. And unfortunately, my copy got turned off there. Not sure how. But there we go. Okay. And so now if I go ahead and do my Boolean operation, my Boolean difference on this guy, so I'll type in Boolean difference. Again, I'll start with the box and subtract all the ellipsoids. And then if I go ahead and copy this guy, oops, you should see that based on how we can orient it, so basically we just flip it every time. Then we'll get like a kind of repeating pattern between the modules. That is not kind of regularly oriented to the geometry there. So if I change into rendered now, you can see we have the same kind of pattern emerging from the overall shape. And that should basically start to happen in every dimension. So if I copied this, oops. I guess not that. So if I copy this vertically now, oops. Oh, I see, it's already oriented properly. Then you should see we have the same thing happening in the other dimension, a kind of repeating set of shapes there. Okay, so this is a little more, that method is a little more complex than this one. And then finally, I'm going to show you the kind of most advanced version, which is what we have on the assignment sheet there. In this one, we're actually just going to carve right through the box rather than making a pattern in the face of the box. And so with this one, I want to go ahead and make a, I'm going to make a cylinder. I go to my solid shapes here. I'll select the cylinder. I believe I can do, so if I do like 2-point cylinder, and then snap between one corner and the other, and then I'm going to hit that option direction constraint. Let me just show you that one more time. So if you type in cylinder or go to the button there in the solid panel, solids options, I'm going to hit the, I'm hitting the option here for 2-point, and I'm going to snap to one end of the box, one corner, and then the other. And then it should automatically draw straight up, but we can toggle that direction constraint. And I'm going to draw it to the opposing edge of the box, like that. Okay, so now we have a cylinder going straight through our box. What I'm going to do is go ahead and move it so that it's on one side or the other of those two edges that I drew it between. So I'll select an end point or a midpoint. You should also have a, if you turn on quad, like if you're not finding there's an endpoint or a midpoint there, there should be a quad there. And you can snap to that and then move it to the midpoint of that edge. Excuse me. Okay, so now we should have that. We should have a cylinder where the end of it is intersecting with that edge of the box. And then finally what we want to do is basically scale this down a little bit. So you're gonna use this to subtract from the box, but we want to make sure that it's you know, like leaving some material left behind. So even though this is, you know, there's a little bit of material there, we want to make sure there's actually a bit more than that. So what I'm gonna do is just, I mean, I could scale it down and then like lengthen it again. What I might do is just explode it and delete the caps, and then I'll just offset that face. If I type in offset surf and hit the option flip so that it offsets inward. I want to turn the option solid off, and then under distance I'll give myself 1/4 of an inch or something, 0.25, and then press enter. 0.25 is actually a lot. Let me try 1/8 of an inch. 0.125. That's pretty good. So there we go. So that's what I mean. I want to have a little bit of gap between the cylinder and the outside edges of my box there. And I'll select that thing again and just type in cap to make it a solid again, to close those openings. Okay, so now we have our box and we have our geometry scaled and oriented to one kind of set of faces. And so again, what we're going to do is we're going to copy this geometry around the box. Now I'll go back into Ghosted here so I can see a little bit better. So what I want to do is first select the box. Again, I'm going to use the command volume centroid and to find that kind of center point there. And then, so basically this cylinder is intersecting with like two faces of the box. And if we look at the box, obviously it's made up of 6 faces, and we can find that you know, we can break apart the remaining faces into sets of 2, right? So what I'm going to do is rotate this thing around the center point so that it intersects with these 2 faces of my box. Again, I'll select the cone, or I'm sorry, this cylinder, type in rotate 3D, snap to the center point there, holding shift to draw straight out. Actually, which way do I want to rotate? I want to rotate this way. I'm holding shift to draw straight out, holding shift again to snap to 90 degrees there, and I'll rotate it 90 degrees. And make sure you had the option copy turned on, obviously. Okay, and so there's our rotated cylinder. I'm going to rotate it one more time, again around the center point. This time I'm just using the command rotate, not rotate 3D, because my rotation axis is the Z axis. Then I'll snap to the center point of the volume, drag out, and rotate 90 degrees. We can turn copy off this time, since we already copied it. Okay, so now you see how the cylinder is kind of intersecting those 2 faces and those 2 faces in the same way. And so the remaining 2 faces are those ones there. If we select this geometry, again, I'll rotate it. This time I am going to turn on copy. Rotate it 90 degrees. Select it. This time type rotate 3D. Snap to the center point. Oops, messed that up. Snap to the center point. Draw straight out. Option copy turned off. And then rotate it 90 degrees. And there we go. So now we should have a box with a cylinder moving through, you know, 3 sets of 2 adjacent faces. Right, and then if I go ahead and copy this guy, oops, then I'll do my Boolean operation again, Boolean difference. Press enter and select my 3 cylinders. And there we go. So that's actually the geometry that's on the assignment sheet. That's the example. And then again with this, so if I kind of copy it around and rotate it in different ways, you'd find that it makes kind of complementary intersections like that. And I believe this one you can also copy in every dimension. X, Y, and Z. Okay, so and let me just show you what that looks like in rendered view. So there we go. There's our kind of, you know, set of geometries there. Okay, so I think that pretty much wraps up this tutorial. So I just want to reiterate, you know, the technique here is to use one kind of geometry and repeat a set of operations, or in this case transformations, meaning move, rotate, and mirror. Kind of around the box to make it modular, to make it kind of meet itself in particular ways. Okay, so once you've got this tutorial done, you'll want to continue on to the tutorial for setting up your model, making sure you have a closed solid, making sure that the scale is right, and sending it to the 3D printer. So once you're done with this tutorial, go ahead and move on to the next one. And I will sign off.